All right. She lets us know. And so this is an introductory educational webinar just to really spread awareness about Tree of Heaven um, and why it is a concern in Napa County. So tree of heaven is a non-native plant species that displaces a lot of other native plant species. It is a host for two invasive pests, the spotted lanternfly and the brown marmorated stink bug. And it also poses an issue in wildfire fuels management work because it's a rigorous or a vigorous resprouter when it's cut, burned, or injured. And it's really great to be joined by two wonderful professionals who will further discuss these concerns, as well as how to identify tree of heaven, methods for management and eradication. And both of our guests have experience working with Tree of Heaven in Napa County and have some great knowledge to share. So thank you both. We're joined tonight by Leif Bryant, an engineering technician with the Napa County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, as well as Chip Borrell, a soil conservationist from the Napa Field Office of the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS for short. And I'm excited that you both are able and willing to share your knowledge and experience. And thanks again for presenting. I'm going to share my screen real fast with you all. Okay, that's the one. Can you all see this slideshow? Thumbs up. Cool. So a little bit of an agenda tonight. These are the topics that we'll cover. And then we'll end with a Q&A section again at the end of the webinar, which will be a great time to unmute and ask any questions, or you can enter them in the chat box, which is that function is usually found in that thought bubble kind of in the center bottom of your screens. You can feel free to enter things in the chat throughout the webinar, and I'll do my best to monitor them. But you can also feel free to hang off or hold off until the end when we have our open Q&A section. And I think that's it as far as housekeeping things. Yeah, so Chip, I'm going to pass it off to you to start us off with some of how to identify tree heaven and talk more about its associated pests.
Okay. I'm at the end of a cold, but several of you have interacted with me talking about Tree of Heaven. I'm enthusiastic about getting people to know about it and if they choose to control it. So the Tree of Heaven is a native to China and was brought to the East Coast in the late 1700s as a hardy street tree, then brought to California later during the gold rush by Chinese immigrants as a cultural and medicinal tree. And its leaves, roots, and bark were or are used as traditional Chinese medicine, primarily as an astringent for skin. So the tree itself, it's potentially large, compound leaf, deciduous tree that, to my knowledge, typically spreads in California by root sprouts rather than seeds. And if a live tree is cut, its shallow roots sprout vigorously within a 50 to 100-foot radius, which many of us have learned. Next slide. And the only tree that's easily confused with Tree of Heaven is black walnut. And the Tree of Heaven leaflets are smooth edged, while the black walnut, it may be hard to see in this photo, but have little teeth on them. And typically the Tree of Heaven leaves are longer than black walnut, and they have more leaflets than black walnut. The leaf petioles, as shown in the photo, are often red. If you can see large nuts hanging from a tree, it's a black walnut, not a Tree of Heaven. Next slide. But the easiest way looking at the leaves is to look at these glandular teeth near the base of the leaflets. And it's tiny to see in there, but there is a gland that makes odors in there. Not all leaflets have it, but typically you will see them. Um, the crushed leaves have an unpleasant odor, and actually most of the plant parts do give off that same offensive odor. Next. So these show, I believe it's a female flower on the upper right and the seeds then on the lower left. So tree of heaven is dioecious, meaning the tree is either male or female. And the trees often grow in dense colonies or clones, and all the trees in a single clone are often the same sex. Female trees are prolific seeders with the potential to produce more than 300,000 seeds annually. And the single seeded Samara, as shown in the lower left, are sort of wind dispersed like maple seeds would be. The trees, established trees continually spread by sending up root suckers from the roots. And root sprouts as young as 2 years can flower and produce seeds. So it can be a problem. Tree of Heaven produces allelopathic chemicals and its leaves, roots, and bark that can limit or prevent the establishment of other plants uh, in the area. The spreading roots or shallow roots can damage infrastructure like shallow foundations of buildings. The foliage can cause contact dermatitis, and the tree of heaven pollen is a common allergen for people. What's not to love in this tree? Next slide. So, tree of heaven is deciduous, drops its leaves in the winter, and the leaves yellow and fall off in late October, early November. And then the leaves sprout out again in late March, early April, and they often have this reddish color when they're very young. Next slide. Then identifying the tree during the winter, the bark is this gray mottled cantaloupe skin kind of texture. It's pretty thin. Then on the smaller twigs have these heart-shaped leaf scars where the compound leaf attaches. The upper one has a bud uh, sticking on the lower one doesn't have a bud. Black walnut, by comparison, has a rougher, shaggier bark, so should be and thicker bark, so should be pretty distinctive. Next, and some photos of if you cut down tree of heaven, it starts sprouting from the roots, from the stump, and from the adjacent roots. Uh, the Even in the lower photo is even in adjacent vineyards where there's irrigation, the roots love to sprout. Oh, next. So this is a thicket of root sprouts from Tree of Heaven, and I don't know if this is where a wildfire killed off the main tree or someone cut it, but this is the result from that. So this is a clone, is probably all male or all female. And my reading says most of the reproduction in California is via root sprouts, but Leaf has told me that he has different experience, that seed reproduction. Next. So this is a map that Napa County Ag Commissioner's Office has been slowly mapping Tree of Heaven in Napa County. And you can see at least these are concentrated mostly in the valley, mostly along the upper Napa River and tributary creeks, particularly Sulphur Creek and Diamond Mountain Creek. There are patches along Silverado Trail near St. Helena, And if you explore behind the Central Valley builders in southern St. Helena, you'll see a lot of them. So if you haven't noticed this tree before, you'll likely now see it around here and recognize it. So move on to the tree of heaven as a host plant. Uh, I just learned recently that it's a host plant to the brown marmorated stink bug. It's like a half-inch long insect that from East Asia, where tree of heaven is from, and the stink bug first showed in Pennsylvania in 1998, and it's in Napa now. The It was a potential concern because the tree of heaven is a host for it, but to my knowledge, the populations of stink bugs are very low, and it has not harmed any crops, and certainly not wine grapes. So that's a good thing. Next, but the other thing is tree of heaven is host to the spotted lanternfly, and this is an almost like 1 inch long uh, insect. It's an invasive sap-feeding plant hopper from China, and it's a potential threat to vineyards. Next, it showed up in southeastern Pennsylvania in 2014, and likely from egg cases on a rock shipment from China, and has been steadily spreading since, often along transportation corridors. So all the blue areas, including upstate New York, Detroit, Chicago, uh, I think Louisville, Kentucky, but it's spread quite a bit. The concern is that it could also spread to California. Next, this is what it looks like in Pennsylvania, and there's huge populations of spotted lanternfly. So on the left, crowded on tree of heaven, and on the right on wine grapes, white grape and red grape. Um, it feeds on many fruit crops, but it especially favors wine grapes, unfortunately. On wine grapes, it produces a honeydew from its wastes that initiates mold on the fruit clusters. So it's a harm to the crop that way. And if enough lanternflies feed on a grapevine, because they're sucking sap out of it, it can kill the vine. So next, um, so studies, the study referenced here talks about uh, spotted lanternfly does not need the tree of heaven to survive, but it survives better, develops faster, and reproduces at higher rates if it has access to tree of heaven. The tree of heaven makes the spotted lanternfly less palatable to predators, uh, much like monarch caterpillars making the monarch butterfly poisonous to predators. Uh, and and the spotted lanternfly likes tree of heaven because it has high sucrose glucose in its sap, and grapevines also have high glucose. Next, so this is a map of the habitat suitability through the United States for spotted lanternfly. And you see in California that the Central Valley and the coastal areas are high suitability. Uh, the likely method that the lanternfly would get across all the Rockies and the Great Basin area is import of live egg cases on trucks or rail cars, on pallets, on rock, on firewood. The spotted lanternflies lay their eggs on all these kind of objects, lay them on telephone poles, and such. The You've probably remember in the news that Ag Inspection Station at Truckee intercepted spotted lanternfly egg cases on a firewood shipment from New Jersey, and more recently on a large metal sculpture from New York that was headed for Sonoma. And the the ag station caught a few of the egg cases. They sent it back to Nevada. They caught more egg cases, and then they shipped it through to Sonoma, where they took it apart and found more egg cases. So the hope, though, is that spotted lanternfly has not yet established itself in a Mediterranean climate with the dry summer. So maybe they won't become as crowded as they are in Pennsylvania. Next, please. The California Department of Food and Agriculture, learning about the potential for spotted lanternfly, did an action plan in 2023. And these are the mentions of tree of heaven in there. And idea that controlling tree of heaven is crucial to controlling the establishment and spread of spotted lanternfly. Removal of tree of heaven may be the most effective means of preventing establishment. And finally, lowering the chance of spotted lanternfly establishment by removing tree of heaven is good, but preserving a few tree of heaven as sentinel trees, which will attract the spotted lanternfly and help with early detection. Good. Next slide. Uh, this is a brochure put out by CDFA and the Pierce's Disease Glacial-wing Sharpshooter Board, and they're actively trying to make people aware of spotted lanternflies so that if you see it, you're supposed to snag it, snap it, and report it. So, and the Napa County Ag Commissioner's Office is also quite engaged in the local spotted lanternfly uh, outreach, and they have a glassy-winged sharpshooter costume that they take to events like Earth Day, and this Earth Day had a spotted lanternfly costume also. So, um, so that's it for me here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chip. Be fun to see that costume out at some events. I'm gonna stop sharing for now. And yeah, I'll pass it off to Leaf. Who's gonna share more about some other concerns that we have about tree heaven in Napa County. Mainly that it's a resprouter and how it can add to fuel loads and things like that. And then maybe chat through some options and methods for management and eradication. And I do have
Yeah,
some slides, but maybe I'll pull them up randomly as you're bringing up things.
sure, sure. You
Okay.
can you can pull up the picture of the thicket of them, right? Where
Yes,
it's just nothing but tree of heaven. So it'll turn into like a monocrop, right? That's the real problem with it. I first started working with trying to eradicate tree of heaven, I think pretty close to 20 years ago on the Mokelumne River. It rapidly colonizes riparian corridors and creates a monocrop and crowds everything out. It's your classic invasive, it doesn't play well with others. It's allelopathic. It keeps other things from growing there. Doesn't support the local ecosystem, the same bugs and birds and all that stuff. Isn't supported by the ailanthus, right? The tree of heaven. And yeah, the Chip had mentioned that it doesn't, it's not as known to grow from seed, but it will grow from seed. I've seen evidence of it. I was reading up on how to propagate it, and you just need moist soil. You don't have to do any special treatment to the seeds. So not only does it spread rapidly through the roots, but it also, creates like hundreds of thousands of seeds. It really just, they go everywhere. Um, Say like the most the quickest way that I've learned to identify it, when you're walking around it, is the smell that it gives off, kind of like a nasty peanut butter-ish kind of smell. So that would be, one of the key. If you've got any sense of smell at all, you can smell it pretty readily when you crush it up a little bit. Yeah, it's a host plant. It doesn't support the local bugs. It supports, some invasive bugs. And controlling it's like really, really difficult, right? So you cut it and it sprouts out 10 more. When it's young, though, like seedlings, or even, I'm not sure, maybe with the root, with the suckers, with the root growth, um, but it has like an L-shaped kind of root. It grows down and then it immediately takes off to the side. So when it's pretty young, at the right conditions, you can mechanically or manually rip it out of the ground, but it's got to be really young for that. There's a bunch of other ways of controlling it. I was looking through both the UC Davis has a good weed report on it that talks about all the different control methods, issues with it. The Invasive Plant Council also has a good write-up on it. Let's see, I've got it it's one of the first ones in the invasive plants of California, a good trusty book here. Um, so yeah, over the, couple of decades I've been working with it, it's a tough one to get rid of, but it's not impossible. And it does, you can get rid of it. Some of the good ways of doing it would be girdling it and using herbicide. Um, Cut stump treatment works really good. There's a good one. So that is like you have to treat it right away. Don't let it go more than like a minute after cutting it. So cut stump and girdling is kind of the same. The chemical gets into the root system about the same way. And foliar spraying also works. I was reading you want to do that kind of in yeah, here's a hack and squirt. That's kind of the same as similar to girdling, but you're just trying to get the chemical into the cambium. Um, and then the timing of when you want to do it, that can kind of change. I think with foliar spraying, you would want to do it early in the summer or late spring when the leaves are fresh and they're gonna uptake the chemical translocated into the root system. It will shed its leaves pretty early on, so you want to do that early in the year. Um, yeah, when it's really young, you can cut it, you can do it manually, try and remove it, but you have to stay on it. You got to do it like a couple of times a year for several years because it will keep root sprouting up. So it'd be interesting to depending on the different areas, and the different treatment methods, what would work better in some areas. Like I control it mostly in riparian zones. So the first year you're going in and dealing with the big ones. And the easy eject lance, that's one method that works pretty good. You can use a tool that sort of injects a, a hollow, like 22 caliber shell, no bullet in it. It's just the casing, and it's got usually a Mazepir with a little wax seal on it. And so when you plug that into the cambium, you put one of those like every 4 inches or so around it. And that works great. And it takes a year or so for it to really kill it, but it's pretty effective. Um, Now, I will say, like anybody that is going to be doing this kind of work, definitely work with a pest control advisor to get a specific recommendation for where you're at. The um, UC Davis weed report, they recommend a few different things. Garlon, they say, is effective, but that has a tendency to volatile at high temperatures, like on a hot day, and grapes are very susceptible to it. So you wouldn't want to use that around um, pretty much the whole valley, right? You don't want to kill off some grapes by accident. So yeah, you've got two sides of things, right? You've got sort of the biomass control, like removing all of the biomass from it. And then you've got the initial treatment, and then you've got several years of follow-up treatment after that. That's kind of the method. And once you start getting into just the resprouts, that's when you can try, the mechanical removal or the foliar spraying, or just your annual cut stump treatment, very, very small. And then depending on, you know, standing hazard kind of stuff, maybe you can take the big ones and griddle them, or use the easy eject lance and leave them standing, and then they'll fall over and decompose. The wood, it's not a hardwood. It's pretty soft, and it does tend to rot pretty quickly. So, once you get it on the ground, it goes away in a few years. It's not too persistent um, in the environment. Um, yeah, looking into all this stuff, I was actually a little surprised about how much literature there is on the medicinal value of it. I guess, it's not all bad, right? It's good for dysentery and a few other things that were more of an issue back when it was brought over during the gold rush era. But yeah, that's kind of, what I've got on it. Recommend anybody who's interested in this really sort of go through the weed report, read up on it some. This is more of an educational thing, just to spread the awareness of it. Um, it's there's a few creeks where it's like gotten really bad. There's a few parts of the river, like for the flood district, I can control it just mostly on areas that we manage through assessment districts, like the Rutherford Restoration Area, or through the Oakville Reach, on the flood project here in Napa. But up valley, it's up there in Calistoga. It's working its way down. It's kind of everywhere. Once you see it, your pattern recognition will click on, and you'll start seeing it everywhere. Um, but yeah, it's a problematic one. It's probably one of the best ones to target for control, especially after the fires. That's when you really see it causing a lot of problems. It will grow back much faster than any of the other natives around it. So we're seeing creeks that have burned, or areas that have burned, and it's just it's nothing but tree of heaven sprouts right afterwards. In the first year or two. And they will create a really dense canopy and shade out stuff, and then drop the leaves, and it'll just keep spreading, right? And so this is definitely like a good time to get people aware of it and start working on it. Um, yeah, I would recommend the three-phase approach to it. One, dealing with the biomass; two, like an initial treatment; and three, like several years of follow-up work to try and keep it out. And that's what I've got written down here. So I'm ready for questions or comments or whatever.
Definitely, yeah. I think that this is a good time to kind of open it up. And I know I think the setting on the Zoom was like people came in with cameras off and muted, but feel free to turn your cameras on too if you want and feel comfortable. But yeah, I think we'll open it up. And there's already some questions in the chat that I can share out. Um, so Scott was wondering if he wanted to do the hack and squirt, how he could get his hands on the proper chemicals.
Yeah. So I've done hack and squirt, and honestly, I've got to say it wasn't very effective. But if you work with a pest control advisor and they recommend hack and squirt, you would they would probably recommend an imazapyr, and that's like a you have to have a special license to buy that. So working with a herbicide contractor is really a good way to do this. And often they not only are they like registered to be able to buy the chemicals and apply them according to all of the proper ag department regulations. You know, it's just they're safe with it, and it's a good method. So, but yeah, you would buy it through like an herbicide distributor. Yeah. Um, there's a few in the valley, as you could imagine, it being an agricultural valley. Um, I would recommend a girdling over a hack and squirt. And I even like to do like a double girdle where you girdle it once. I use a chainsaw or an electric chainsaw. You do it once all the way around, and then do it one more time, like a foot up, and then that bark in between the two dries and dies and falls off, and it's sort of like a belt and suspenders approach. Um, what else do we got?
Yeah.
Bill was looking at the go back to the herbicide slide,
Oh, sure
which
thing.
that one was.
Yeah. The weed report.
Well, you're looking at that, yeah, treating mature tree of heaven located in or around organic vineyard operations. This is a tough one, right? I mean, there's a few plants that are really, really hard to remove without chemical. Um, and that's why I prefer the biomass removal and then a cut stump treatment, because then you're not spraying anything. There's no drift. It's a very targeted approach. It's the smallest amount of chemical that you could possibly use, because you're essentially putting it directly into the cambium system of the tree. If you wanted to go after it through organic, without using any chemical at all, typically you would, it'd be like ripping the band-aid off. You would cut the tree down, it would root sprout everywhere. You would send crews in there to dig out the root sprouts 3 times a year, for the next 3 to 5 years or something like that, and then eventually you would exhaust the nutrients that the root system has built up. Yeah, it would be a slog, but you could do it.
Yeah, the sort of strategy is if you just cut the tree, it sprouts everywhere. And normally, with herbicide use as an option, you don't want to do that. And the two things is to keep the tree as healthy and alive as you can as you apply the herbicide, so that the live tree translocates the herbicide down into the roots and kills the roots. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. Uh, Whichever technique does that best should work best. The other is follow up. Is No method is 100% first time out. So follow up with something. And with the organic vineyard, yeah, it's a conundrum. And Leaf described it well. Is you can't use the herbicide to kill the roots. You have to exhaust its carbohydrates and nutrients. And you might have to cut resprouts every 2 weeks or a month, or because you don't want any photosynthesis to put more carbohydrates down into the root. You want to exhaust it. So I haven't seen anybody do that, but it should work.
I was looking for some literature on how long the seeds are viable. Um, and I think they're is good for a couple of years, but from what I know, I don't. It's not quite like broom. It's not like you're going to disturb the soil in 50 years and get a flush of tree of heaven coming up. Should have found that information sooner. But
I I think
yeah,
they're pretty short, like 1 to 2 year.
one
Uh,
to 2 years. I think
yeah.
it's something like that. Yeah.
I don't see any other questions coming in to the chat box right now, but folks, typed in some good questions in the sign up form, so we can dig into some of those. Um, Someone was curious, if they're noticing tree of heaven around Napa County, like how to report its locations. Like, can you call the ag commissioner's office and let them know, and someone goes out and verifies, or is there a system set up for?
I don't think there's enough of an impetus to control it for like reporting observations to be useful at this point. You know, it's not like you're going to tell it to somebody and they're going to run out there and do something about it. We know where it is. There's more of it than we can deal with. Um, so I think really it comes up to like the property owners to do what they can on their properties. And, um, in some cases, there's some agencies that can help out. The flood district is one. We've got some assistance that we can lend to property owners for invasive management and riparian zones. So that's one way to reach out and trying to get some assistance with it. But really, it's what do you want? Do you want it to be your neighbor? Do you want it to grow in your property? If you don't, then you should do something about it. But yeah, it's also very like an urban tree. So if you're renting and you're growing in your apartment complex, that's a whole nother. It's kind of it's the cat's out of the bag. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
But where we can do the best to control it was, I think, in like riparian areas or in those, especially up valley, Diamond Mountain, Calistoga. Work your way downstream is kind of my method. Yeah.
Nice. Sherry, thanks so much for joining tonight. See your hands up.
Yeah. Oh, I saw Gretchen Muir from Diamond Mountain Fire Safe Council on the call, and I wanted to give a shout out to their Fire Safe Council for taking on the Tree of Heaven as a project to try to use herbicide to kill the trees, and then ahead of Napa Firewise coming in to cut cut them down, or at least some of them. But I don't know the very latest. So Gretchen, if you're still on. And
I am on. Hello?
hello.
Oh, I am on. I'm in my car, but I pulled
Oh,
over.
oh, shoot, sorry.
Trying to get home today before the seminar started, but I'm in Petaluma. So yeah, so we've been super interested in finding out best practices, and I was very interested to hear today just now that foliar spray is best in the spring. So that is what we're kind of maybe going to lean into in the next couple of weeks here. I'm not sure, but we're talking about it last fall. So, and if you could talk a little bit about using imazapyr in a creek side kind of a setting. My herbicide application person says that he can do it super carefully and that the imazapyr sort of breaks down and doesn't really get into the water. So just any kind of advice about that or feedback about how is it used in a creek or the side of a creek or in a creek? Because that's where we've got it the most.
Sure. Yeah, often the surfactants are a big factor when working around water, right? Surfactants is like a soap that's added to the herbicide to make it spread, make it more soluble, help it get into the plant system. So there's some aquatic approved or aquatic adjacent approved imazapyrs. Trying to remember, maybe it's Habitat or one of those. There's a few. If you're using glyphosate, it's probably going to be Aquamaster. If you're using imazapyr, I think it's Habitat. But yeah, really the trick is to use as little chemical as possible. And that can mean like having someone hold a painter's tarp up on one side, and then they spray, spray the plant so that the drift isn't going into the water. It could be something like bending the top of the tree down,
Mhm.
so that you're spraying like right onto the leaves as opposed to, up waving it around up in the air. Um, for the herbicide use that the flood district does, we have a NPDS permit, a National Pollution Discharge Permit, and we take water samples before and after spraying. And it does get into, there's acceptable limits, that you're allowed to get in there, but you have to be really careful. And imazapyr, they say that it breaks down pretty quick. My experience is that it has a fairly lasting effect. Um, but you will see things like elderberry is very resistant to it. So we've had some areas where we've done some uh, imazapyr treatment stuff, and the next year elderberries sprout up all over it, which is interesting. Yeah, but it's the minimization of drift is what you really do, and there's basically two ways of doing that. One, use as little chemical as possible, and two, you know, use some kind of barrier, so that you're not getting it in the water.
Okay, well, that's helpful advice. And I think our person that I've been, working with so far, trying to kind of craft together an approach, seems extremely conscious of that and very
Mhm.
concerned about being careful. And so that's, good news.
Yeah,
The tarp is a good
yeah,
idea. Hmm.
yeah. I mean, we've even had our contractors take a ladder out with them so that they can,
Sure.
climb up and
Right at
spray
the
just the
top.
leaves
Yeah.
right at the top. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we have a bunch now that are like a big stick with a little puffball on the top
Right.
sprouting out. And so you're
Yeah.
thinking that at this time, when as long as there's that little puffball of leaves coming out, then that would be enough to carry it down to the root.
You probably want it
I think
fully
a
kind of
little bit
fully leaf
more.
out a little bit more, I would think, because you want to maximize the surface area that you're getting chemical
Mm-hmm.
on to translocate into the roots, but also do it at a time when the leaves are really um, supple and fresh, and they don't have a lot of
Yeah.
barriers, and they can pull it
Yeah.
in, and long before it starts thinking about dropping its leaves and creating fruit, and
Yeah. And then
putting its energy out instead of in.
once you've applied it to like a younger sort of tree, not the big ones that you want to girdle, but that you've applied it to the younger ones, how long do you think it takes for the plant to be dead?
Um, it's like Chip was saying, the slower it takes to kill it, the better a kill you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's hard to say, because you're dealing not with just with the above ground plant, but the root system
You're
and
trying to
how
get.
much gets into there. So it could be, probably one treatment a year for a couple of years,
Mm-hmm.
might be, and then sometimes, with some other species, we'll hold off a couple of years and let things grow back to see where everything is, just so that you're not, spending too much time hunting around for stuff. You kind of get enough growth that you make it worth the effort. But with Tree of Heaven, um, I think it's
I'm
just
curious because
practice.
we do have a vegetation management crew coming through Diamond Mountain Road midsummer. And so my goal is, if we could treat the tree of heavens that we see that are sprouting up everywhere. We did a little treatment in the fall, and some of those look dead, so that was good. But if we could treat, say in May, and then have them cut at the end of June, or do we have to try to get the crew to not cut them? Like, don't cut these ones, even though you're cutting, 100 feet. Don't cut these ones because we don't want them to sprout back. So
I
I guess
think,
we'll have to play
a
around with that.
month, I would think that a month would be enough time, um, for it to be getting into being, effective in the root system.
Okay, well that's good.
Um,
And then if they do, I mean, I'm figuring that we will probably have to come back, in a couple of
Yeah.
years or a year and retreat or, keep our eye on it. It can't be
Right.
one and done.
But I think we're
okay.
learning as we go. So
Yeah.
I would, try cutting some, try leaving some, and
hmm
see what happens.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Now, in my experience has been if the tree is cut pretty close after treatment, it has not translocated all the stuff to the roots, and you get resprout.
Mm.
Yeah.
Some of it local uh, to Diamond Mountain area. So it, in concept, if you can wait over the winter,
hmm
that the herbicide translocates and gets to spend a winter killing the root. Next spring will tell you what the result is.
Right.
Where if you cut it just a month later, you don't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you may end up with all the sprouts that you didn't want to have.
Yeah. But we'll have to thread that needle carefully.
Yes.
But next spring, we won't have a crew coming in to do veg management on the road.
And
So,
that's a planning thing of,
well, it is a planning
ideally,
thing.
don't plan to cut until 2026 what you herbicide treat in 2025.
Yeah. Well, I'll
Because then
see
you
if
get
we
the
can.
best chance for success.
Yeah, we'll see if we can mark
Right.
those trees then. And these,
Yeah.
we're talking small stuff.
Mhm.
We also have some really large ones, which seem like that would be a different approach. And I wanted to
Yeah.
ask one more question about girdling. You were saying a chainsaw around and then another foot up, another chainsaw. Does that include you're also adding the herbicide, or that's just
You
chainsaw
just do herbicide on the bottom
on the bottom?
one. And I think Solano RCD actually did some testing of different methods,
Mm.
and they had found, if I remember right, that the herbicide lance was the most effective one,
For a
even
tree like
better.
that.
Yeah, even better than girdling, if I remember right.
Mm.
And,
If you
so
put enough pellets in,
yeah, if you put
it's
enough
good.
in. The one thing to watch out about with that one, which it came up when I was using it a few years back, is that because it's a high concentration in the herbicide shells, you don't have to worry about drift and that kind of thing. But there is a recommended amount of ounces per acre that you use. And if you're doing a thicket of Tree of Heaven with this concentrated, amount,
Mm.
that can become an issue.
Okay. Well, so far we don't have too many thickets. It's just a lot of like along the road and along the.
Yeah,
So we're hoping to catch it before it becomes thicket.
right. But I think there's different methods for the different diameters.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
working with a bigger diameter one, the herbicide lance is really good. For the
Yeah.
small stuff, the foliar treatment or the cut stump.
Yeah.
And then
Okay.
the really small stuff, manual removal.
Get up. Yeah. Well, and we do have one organic vineyard that is suffering quite a bit of Tree of Heaven around the fringes. So, the idea of manually removing it and then just having enough manpower out there for them to have enough
Mhm.
manpower to come out every few weeks and keep digging up the roots. That sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, probably, 3 times a year would be more than enough.
And
Yeah.
then maybe for a couple of years before you
And
really
for a
just
couple of years. Yeah.
carve it out. hmm Well, that's good to know that can work. you
Mhm.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want the thing with that is you can't stop before it's done. You can't go 3 years. No, I'm tired of this and
Yeah.
gotta see it through.
Yeah. The commitment to the organic has to be fully
Mhm.
there with all of that labor. Well, thanks so much, you guys, for putting this out and also recording it so we can share it with different neighbors and people and
Mhm.
a lot of vineyard people. I've talked to people who have no idea what it is or that it's potentially so dangerous to the vineyard community. I'd like to see the Vineyard Association get in there and the growers, and get really serious about putting the word out.
Yeah. And, maybe it would be nice, here I'm, pie in the sky kind of thought, but a lot of it is roadside problems.
Hmm.
And if the county
Well,
uh,
that's a tricky thing because
developed some, invasive, you know, plant strategies, this one would
yeah,
be a good
that
one
that
for
that
the
would be a great one. I've spoken
roadside people to take care of.
directly. Yeah, I've talked directly to the roadside department and the head of that, and they've been so criticized in the past for doing spraying on the roadsides and actually and maybe harming a
Mhm.
vineyard that they are totally hands off. Like no
Right.
spray, we don't do it anymore. And it's like, well, but maybe this might be an exception if you did it
Yeah.
really carefully and not like just, you know,
Could
wholesale.
could be, at some point they'll be able to develop funding to have like a
Mm-hmm.
hit squad, kind of a targeted,
Mm-hmm.
crew that goes through to help. But that's a policy decision
Yeah,
and a funding
yeah,
issue.
yeah.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. I just want to point out a few things. Kareen in the chat shared that there's a species scout program through UCANR, and they're actually tracking or collecting tree heaven locations. So I'll include that in some of the resources that I send out in a follow-up email. And then we had another question from Scott who was wondering how tree heaven rates as a fire hazard.
I mean, Sherry could probably deal with that. My thought is it's just vegetative matter. It's not very fine like a French broom, so it probably wouldn't carry as hot a flame, but it's fine fuels in the understory, and when that catches fire, it spreads the fires up into the canopy. So all our fuel reduction efforts
Yeah.
are trying to minimize the understory so that any fire stays on the ground.
Say that it's probably, dropping seed pretty close to fire season, and those seeds are like little propellers, so um, I don't know if any, I'm sure that somebody studied this, but I don't have any information on it.
I would add, I don't have information either, but I will look into that too. My observation is that it grows in such a thicket in some places, for instance, along Sulphur Creek, that the trees trap a lot of debris when the wind blows, and so then there's a lot of flammable materials kind of trapped in there. So that would be one issue. And then just from a fuel reduction maintenance standpoint, cutting it and then having so many trees resprout over and over again is a great expense and difficulty for trying to keep fuels under control. So, and then of course, as you're trying to manage areas for, for fuels, you're removing some trees, and so I think it makes it all the more important to try to save space for native vegetation in those places where possible.
Great. Thank you, Sherry.
Danielle, did you want to go through some of the registration questions?
We went through a few of them. Did
So
you see
I
any
made
tips?
some notes on some of them.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah, close us out with a few of those, and then I'll just want to reserve like 1 minute at the very end to do a quick closing thing.
Yeah. Well, and Leaf and I have different backgrounds, and so he may have different answers to some of the things. So one of those, how can we ensure landscapers, park managers, fuel reduction contractors know that cutting Tree of Heaven down will result in many new sprouts? Um, that's part of what we're doing tonight, but to me, it's education and publicity uh, to like PG&E, to the county road department, whoever's doing clearing, uh, Napa County Firewise Foundation. Sherry is here. Uh, that they're people are not hiring contractors who just masticate Tree of Heaven. Uh, there was if you're not using an herbicide, how many years do you have to cut down all the resprouts before the tree dies? And you have to exhaust the root. And I would think it might take 2 seasons to do that. The more often you cut the resprout leaves, the less photosynthesis puts carbohydrates back into the root. So if if you were cutting it every week, maybe it would just take a year. If you do it every 3 months, it might not ever kill the root. Uh, so it's
Yeah,
a kind of a balance there.
yeah, that this one would have to be one that, people would have to experiment with.
Yeah.
I work a lot with arundo, which is like a kind of a type of bamboo, and I've seen that one lay dormant for 3 years underground without photosynthesizing and then shooting up roots or shooting up, shoots, and the roots, just hold. I don't know how they can do it, but they can survive for like up to 3 years without any photosynthesis at all. They just hunker down. Um,
Hmm.
so it's just a matter of practice. I think there's not a lot of people that have tried to control Ailanthus tree of heaven purely mechanically for long enough to exhaust it. So whoever whoever wants to give it a shot, report back in a year to 10 years and let us know how it went.
Great. That Arendo, that is really super flammable too.
Yeah.
There are a couple of questions about what kind of fire fuel the resprouts are, and I think we covered that. Uh, there's a comment of Solano County that's been more proactive in tree of heaven removal. The RCD has done some, as I recall, and their ag commissioner's office does some. Uh, we have a new contact who is here tonight, and I have not spoken with her to get the wisdom from Solano County. I know they really favor the easy ject shells as the best and most effective method uh, to work on that. Uh, is Tree of Heaven good for firewood? Uh, I haven't
It
tried it. It's
I've
you said it
I've
was a
burned it.
soft.
I've burned it quite a lot actually. It's it's kind of like, you know, pine without the sap. It's not great, but it does burn. It's a soft wood. Um, yeah, it burns fairly clean and fairly quick. Um,
I'll have to try some this winter.
A good way maybe to get rid of some of the
Yeah,
biomass.
and I think
I
that
do
covers the questions.
great. Yeah, I was gonna say it brings us right up to the end. I don't want to keep people too much longer past 6:30 because I know it's an evening and appreciate you guys all joining us. Um, quick couple things. Um, I'll follow up in an email with a recording of this webinar, which will also be posted on our website and can be shared out with whomever. I'll put the slides up there as well. And then a couple other resources like the weed report, a little one pager about tree heaven. Um, and then maybe some of the ones that were shared tonight too, like the Species Scout program. Thank you again, Corrine. And then maybe like a link to Solano RCD resources if they have any. I'll try to connect with them as well. And then I'll also ask y'all to fill out like a 3-question feedback form, just to find out what you all want more information about regarding tree heaven or any other forest health topics. I know I've talked to Sherry quite a few times about maybe putting on some like field days or something about tree heaven and getting groups out in person to look at the tree and talk through management. So yeah, I would love to hear more about what the community is looking for and what would be most helpful. So any feedback is always welcome. But thank you all so much. Thank you, Leaf, and thank you, Chip. Appreciate your engagement and everything.
no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks all.
Yeah. Hope you all have a good night and a good weekend.